In a small town called Frostwood, winter was always harsh. Thick snow covered the streets and the fierce winds howled like hungry wolves. The town was isolated from the outside world, especially on long winter nights when the power often went out, leaving darkness as the sole ruler. On one of those nights, a group of friends, Luna, Kyle, Hannah, and Ryan, decided to spend the night in Luna's old family cabin, located on the edge of the forest. The cabin was the perfect place to escape the pressures of life, but it was also full of dark secrets. As they arrived, the air was unnaturally cold, even for Frostwood. Snow blanketed everything, and the sky was as black as ink. The moment they stepped inside, a strange feeling wrapped around them. The old wooden walls creaked like whispers, and the wind battered the windows as if trying to force its way in. Luna, who knew the cabin well, tried to reassure her friends. "Don't worry, it's just old. We'll light the fireplace and everything will be fine." As the night fell, strange noises began to echo through the cabin. At first they thought it was just the wind, but the sounds repeated at regular intervals, like footsteps circling them. Kyle, the most skeptical of them, suggested going outside to check, but Luna stopped him. "It's dangerous out there, especially in this weather." But the noises didn't stop. They came from the roof, then from beneath the floor, as if something was moving all around them. Hannah, the most frightened, started crying. "There's something here with us. I can feel it." The next morning they decided to search the cabin to find the source of the noises. While exploring, they discovered a small hidden door in the floor, covered with a thick layer of dust. When they opened it, they found a dark cellar leading downward. Ryan, holding a flashlight, was the first to descend. The cellar was cold and damp, its walls covered in strange symbols and words written in an unknown language. At the end of the passage, they found a small room containing an ancient altar stained with dried blood. Luna trembled with fear. "This place... my grandfather used it for strange rituals. People in town used to say he dealt with dark forces." As the second night fell, the atmosphere became even more terrifying. The noises returned, but this time they were louder. The power went out, leaving only the dim glow of candles. Suddenly they heard a horrifying sound coming from the cellar. It was laughter, chilling and sinister. Kyle, trying to keep everyone calm, said, "We need to get out of here now." But when they tried to open the door, they found it locked tight, as if something was holding it shut. Shadows suddenly flickered across the cabin. The noises grew closer, and the candles began to extinguish one by one. In the suffocating darkness, they heard Luna scream, "He's here! It's my grandfather!" When the power suddenly returned, they found Luna lying on the floor, her body horribly twisted, as if something had torn her apart from the inside. Blood covered the floor, and the stench was unbearable. Kyle, Hannah, and Ryan tried to escape, but the doors and windows remained sealed shut. The eerie sounds returned, but this time they were coming from inside the room. Dark figures moved swiftly, as if hunting them. Ryan tried to scream, but his voice was suddenly silenced, as if an invisible force had shut his mouth. Hannah, sobbing uncontrollably, tried to hide under the table, but the shadows found her. Kyle, desperately resisting his fear, saw Luna's eyes glowing in the darkness, watching him. Before he could scream, he felt an icy hand grip his throat. Then everything went black. The next morning, rescuers found the cabin locked tight. When they finally forced their way inside, they found the room in chaos. But there was no trace of the four friends. Blood was everywhere, but no bodies were found. To this day, no one knows exactly what happened that night, but the people of Frostwood say the spirits of the four friends are still trapped in the cabin, and their voices can be heard on stormy winter nights. In a small town in Maine, known for its harsh snowstorms, the largest winter storm in decades was about to hit the area. Roads were closing, electricity was frequently cutting out, forcing residents to stay in their homes. Amid this gloomy atmosphere, Rebecca, a college student in her 20s, decided to return to her family's abandoned house deep in the woods to retrieve some important documents related to her late father's inheritance. The house carried a notorious reputation. 20 years ago, an entire family disappeared inside it during a similar snowstorm, leaving no trace except for mysterious footprints leading into the depths of the forest, where no one dared to follow. When Rebecca arrived at the house, snow was falling heavily, and the cold was so intense it seemed to pierce her bones. The house stood like a silent block of darkness, surrounded by barren trees and the sound of the wind howling like a whistle. As she entered, she felt an odd sensation, as if the house were watching her. Dust covered the furniture, and the air was thick with the smell of mold, but all of that was expected. What she didn't expect was the deep sense of unease, as if she were not alone. Rebecca began searching the drawers and cabinets, trying to find the documents her family lawyer had requested. As she searched, she discovered an old box hidden beneath the floorboards. She cautiously opened it to find photographs and letters belonging to the family that had disappeared. At first, the photos seemed ordinary, but minutes later she noticed something wrong. In every photo, there were strange shadows standing behind the family as if watching them. While examining the photos, she heard a faint sound, like footsteps crunching in the snow outside the house. Rebecca tried to convince herself that what she heard was just her imagination or the sound of the wind, but she couldn't shake her growing fear. She moved toward the window, and when she looked outside, she saw fresh footprints leading away from the house into the forest. No one should have been out in such harsh weather, but she felt an inexplicable urge to follow them. She donned her coat, grabbed a flashlight, and cautiously followed the tracks. The deeper she went into the forest, the clearer the footprints became, but they looked strange. They twisted and turned unnaturally, as if whatever made them wasn't entirely human. Suddenly, the track stopped at an open clearing in the woods, where she found a large circle carved into the snow, filled with cryptic symbols. That's when she felt something behind her. She turned quickly to find a strange man standing there, with distorted features and black, soulless eyes. He spoke in a soft yet knife-sharp voice. "You finally returned. I've been waiting for you." Rebecca tried to run, but it seemed as if he controlled the snow. The ground around her suddenly became slippery, and the wind pushed her toward the circle. The man revealed his identity, saying he wasn't human, but an ancient entity that had inhabited this forest for centuries. He told her he was responsible for the previous family's disappearance, and that he drew power from people's fears and darkest secrets. As Rebecca tried to distract him by talking, she noticed something strange about the symbols she saw inside the circle. They resembled those drawn on the back of one of the photos she had found. She hurried back to the house as fast as she could, with the man or entity pursuing her, his voice filling the air with a promise that she wouldn't escape. Once inside, she frantically searched for the photo with the symbols. When she found it, she noticed a small book beside it that was very old and filled with cryptic spells. She began reading aloud from the book, and when she reached a particular incantation, the house shook violently, and the entity, which was about to grab her, suddenly stopped, as if something was preventing it from moving forward. The book revealed that the entity was bound to the house and needed a human sacrifice to maintain its existence. But she also discovered that if the symbols within the forest circle were burned, it could be destroyed. Rebecca ventured out again into the storm, carrying the book, a flashlight, and some fuel. When she reached the circle, she set it on fire and began chanting the incantation. The entity appeared once more, furious this time, trying to extinguish the fire, but the snow around her started to melt rapidly, revealing human remains buried beneath. The entity let out a terrifying scream before vanishing completely. When Rebecca returned to the town the next day with the police, they found that the house had entirely disappeared, leaving only an empty patch of land. All traces of the horror were gone, but she couldn't forget the whisper she heard, in the last moment before the entity vanished. The snow doesn't erase the blood. It was a cold winter night in a small town called Woodville, located in the far north of the United States. Snow covered everything, and the wind howled like hungry wolves. It was the strongest snowstorm in decades, and it had cut off power to the entire town, leaving the residents in complete darkness. Emma, a woman in her mid-20s, lived in a small house on the outskirts of the town. She was alone, as her husband, Mike, was away on a business trip and wouldn't be back for days. She was used to being by herself, but something about that night made her feel uneasy. The storm grew stronger, and the snow piled up against the windows. Emma tried to light the fireplace, but the wood was damp and wouldn't catch fire. She sat on the couch wrapped in a thick blanket, trying to distract herself by reading a book, but the sound of the wind seemed to whisper her name. Suddenly, there was a knock at the door. Emma was stunned. Who could be outside in this weather? She hesitated for a moment, then got up and walked to the door. When she opened the small window beside it, she saw nothing but darkness and falling snow. "Who's there?" she shouted, but the wind drowned out her voice. Then the knocking came again, but this time it was louder and more urgent. Emma felt her anxiety rising, but she decided to open the door. When she did, there was no one there, just the snow beginning to drift inside. She quickly closed the door and felt the cold creeping into her bones. She returned to the couch, trying to convince herself it was just the wind, but minutes later she heard another sound, this time coming from upstairs. It was the sound of footsteps. "Mike, are you here?" she called out, but then she remembered he wouldn't be back for days. Her heart began to race. She grabbed an old wrench from the drawer and slowly climbed the stairs, each step creaking in the eerie silence. When she reached the top, she found nothing. The rooms were as empty as she had left them, but she noticed something strange. The bedroom window was open and snow was falling onto the floor. She hadn't opened that window. She quickly closed the window and looked around. She felt as though someone was watching her, but the room was empty. She decided to go back downstairs, but as she turned, she saw a shadow move behind her in the mirror. She let out a faint scream, but didn't dare look again. She hurried downstairs and closed the door behind her. She sat on the couch trying to calm herself, but then the knocking at the door came again. This time there were voices, whispers coming from outside. She couldn't make out the words, but they seemed to be calling her. "Emma, Emma." She decided not to open the door this time. She grabbed her phone, but the signal was weak. She tried calling the police, but the line was busy. She felt desperate, and then she heard another sound, this time coming from the basement. It was a strange sound, like a muffled laugh. Emma would never normally go down to the basement, but she felt compelled to check. She took a flashlight and opened the basement door with a trembling hand. As she descended the stairs, she felt the cold intensify. The air was heavy, as if something was waiting for her down there. When she reached the bottom, she shone the flashlight around. At first she saw nothing, but then she noticed something strange on the wall. There were odd drawings, like ancient symbols, that hadn't been there before. And as she got closer, she heard the whispers again, but this time they were louder. "Emma, it's too late." She froze, and then she heard footsteps behind her. When she turned, she saw a tall shadow standing in the corner. She tried to scream, but her voice was gone. The shadow moved closer, and the whispers grew stronger. Emma ran for the stairs, but she tripped and fell. When she looked up, she saw the shadow standing over her. Its eyes glowed in the dark, and it had a wide grin on its face. "You're mine now." The next morning the storm stopped. Mike returned home, but he couldn't find Emma. All he found was the basement door open and strange drawings on the walls. No one ever heard from her again. But the locals say that on stormy winter nights, you can hear whispers coming from the house, whispers calling your name. In the small town of Salem, Massachusetts, winter was always harsh. Snow covered everything, and the cold winds howled like beasts. But this winter was different. The snowstorm that hit the town was the worst in a century, forcing everyone to stay indoors. Amidst this storm, Sarah, a college student in her 20s, decided to explore an old abandoned house on the outskirts of town. The house was known as the Mirror House because of the massive mirror that hung in the living room. The mirror was strange, with a black wooden frame adorned with mysterious symbols, and it gave off a faint reflection, as if it didn't show the true image. Sarah wouldn't have gone alone, but her friends Jake, Leah, Tom, and Chloe decided to join her. They arrived at the house at night in the middle of a violent snowstorm. Snow was piling up against the door, and the wind screamed as if warning them not to enter. When they stepped inside, they felt a strange atmosphere enveloping the place. Dust covered everything, and the smell of mildew filled the air. But the only thing that seemed clean and shiny was the mirror. Sarah stood in front of it, staring at her faint reflection. She felt as though the mirror was staring back at her. "This mirror is so weird," Sarah said, touching the wooden frame. "Don't touch it," Jake suddenly shouted. "I've heard stories about this mirror. They say it's cursed." Everyone laughed, but Sarah noticed something strange. When she stepped away from the mirror, her reflection remained in place, staring at her with a sinister smile. She screamed and turned to her friends, but they saw nothing. The reflection returned to normal. Things started escalating quickly. They heard footsteps upstairs and saw shadows moving around. Tom tried to take a picture of the mirror with his phone, but the photo came out completely black, as if the mirror had swallowed the light. By midnight, they decided to leave, but they discovered that the front door was jammed shut, as if something was preventing them from exiting. They tried opening the windows, but they were sealed tight. They were trapped. Then the mirror began acting strangely. The reflections started moving on their own, as if there was another world behind the glass. Sarah saw her reflection smile at her, then disappear, leaving the mirror empty. Suddenly, a hand reached out from the mirror, trying to grab her. Everyone screamed and ran upstairs, but the mirror was everywhere. In every room there was a version of the mirror, waiting for them. The voices grew louder and the shadows moved faster. In the end, they found themselves trapped in a small room on the top floor. The mirror was there, covering the entire wall. Reflections began stepping out of the mirror one after another. They were distorted versions of themselves with horrifying faces and black eyes. "We can't escape," Chloe whispered, crying. But Sarah knew what she had to do. She grabbed a chair and threw it at the mirror. The glass shattered and a terrifying scream filled the room. Darkness fell, and suddenly they found themselves outside the house at dawn. They thought breaking the mirror had ended the curse, but they were wrong. When they returned to their homes, they noticed something strange. Each of them saw their reflection moving on its own, smiling or staring at them. Even when they broke all the mirrors in their houses, the reflections appeared in windows, in water, in any reflective surface. In the end, they disappeared one by one. Sarah was the last. Before she vanished, she wrote in her journal, "The mirror wasn't broken. It was just waiting.